Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, in this video, I want to talk about kind of the ethics, maybe I would call it the ethics and maybe even the philosophy of what it means to get into personality disorder recovery. Okay, because right off the bat, I'm going to be very honest, I've always been very, very uncomfortable with sort of the catch-22. It's a catch-22 of having a bad personality, let's say, or a problematic personality, because then you're forced to focus on your personality to get better. Okay, so what does that mean? Right off the bat, the door is open that you're going to become very, very self-absorbed to try to get out of something that is already kind of a self-absorption, you see. So like, to get out of this trap, what we have to be narcissistic to get out. You know what I mean? Like, isn't there something narcissistic about getting really focused on your own personality? I'm sorry, but I think that's a real problem. I think it's a real problem, and I think it makes it very delicate, because I really, maybe to some extent, we have to maybe become more aware, maybe aware, but I don't think we should say so much self-aware. I think we got to be careful. I think it should be just general awareness, including the self. Okay. And so I just think it's really important that as we approach really the huge challenge of, let's say, what does it even mean to get better? You know, will you become a fake person? Are you going to falsify your personality? You know, there's a lot of real issues. Like, is it more real when you're just yourself being a jerk? You know, because maybe that's authentic. You know, like these are serious, serious questions. Um, and I think even the stories we tell about personality disorders, like, oh, this comes from trauma, this comes from, nobody knows that. That's not knowledge. In the world of psychology, there is very little actual knowledge. More than in any other science, you know, what you have are a lot of theories, a lot of constructs, a lot of ideas. Even what I'm saying is just an idea. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, the idea that it comes from trauma, it comes from abuse. Isn't that just a way of saying I'm not really like this? You know, I'm not really like that. What are we really talking about? You know, it's like an excuse. Like, I won't. What it's really saying is I won't be faking. I won't be inauthentic if I start to become someone else. You know what I mean? But really, down at the bottom, there is an uncertainty. You know, maybe there are some parts of us that are authentic and real, even when we're not being nice or not being good or not being, not fitting in with other people. You know what I mean? Then finally, the third problem is that I think there's something very narcissistic about people who get triggered by narcissistic people. Okay. The people who are most triggered by narcissistic people, who are most indignant, oh God, how offensive. And I'll include myself. I may have an NPD diagnosis, okay, but I get really annoyed with people that are very narcissistic. I find it very provocative. But, I also think it's very narcissistic to be at the far extreme of the people who get the most provoked by narcissistic people. Okay, I mean, really. And it's kind of funny because, let's say I've seen these videos out there, like say the Dr. Ramani and the people that go on these campaigns against narcissism and just narcissism, even Dr. Todd Grande, And I mean, well-meaning people. They're probably better than I am. They're better people than I am. But I think there's something narcissistic about getting so focused on narcissism and so indignant and so aghast at narcissism. Or even, like true crime, like, oh my God, you see that guy killed somebody. It's like, okay, by the way, look, I don't celebrate any crime. I get really turned off by psychopaths and, whatever. Um, but the bottom line is, I think, is there not the possibility, okay, that maybe we are imposing a very narrow vision of humanity because we have an ideal? When we start talking about ideals, we start talking about narcissistic thought patterns, right? Could we not, as a society, have our own societal narcissism that we imagine humanity to be a little nicer than it really is? Okay. And is that not a narcissistic delusion? Okay. In other words, is the narcissistic process not a general, universal human process that has impacted and infected society, culture? You know, who says that we're so nice, in general? Yeah, there are nice people, but who says that as a humanity that here we are, the humans, and then we have those pathological people over there that do bad things? Whoa. Are we not like pretending that humans are better than what we are and that those people over there are it's only a sickness? When you say it's a sickness, you're saying a normal person wouldn't do that. Well, how do you know? How do you know there isn't some percentage of normal people who could kill, who could do terrible things, and who could act like jerks and whatever, okay? Or very selfish, whatever. Um, Obviously it's still a very small percentage. I mean, we're talking about, the tail end, but it's important philosophically to decide whether we're pretending it's not part of our humanity, or that if we do admit it as a part of our humanity, well, that's the pathological part. That's the sick part. In other words, it's not fully legitimately human, you know, because we insist that what is a human being is maybe a little nicer than what we really are. Who has the guts to think that? Maybe we are maybe largely pretty nice, but maybe we're not as wonderfully kind as we'd like to think that we are. Okay, maybe the average is somewhere in the middle, kind of more or less, a little bit kind, but and then here's the other thing too. I think there's something very narcissistic about people who are always reinforcing empathy, 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 kindness, compassion. When you have to hammer it so much and you have to emphasize and underline it all the time, that to me is a sign that it's something that's uneasy for you, that you're not comfortable with. And that means that you don't really have it, so comfortable like you seem to say. So I think that to me is the kind of repetition and emphasis. Always talking about the buzzword. I got to throw in the buzzword, the empathy, just reminding people the kindness, the goodness. When you have to talk and talk and talk and proclaim so much about something, it's because you don't really have it. It's because you're wanting to juice it up because it's something that's not really comfortably set in, because when you're secure, you don't talk like that, you know. And I have seen people that I believe are truly kind and good and maybe empathetic. I've seen those people. Okay, and the ones who really, really have it are not on a campaign, and it's not a proclamation, and it's not a bandwagon, you know. So basically, the point I'm making is, I mean, there's narcissism everywhere. Okay, that's not what makes someone have an NPD diagnosis. An NPD diagnosis, I think, is a poorly defined construct. But I think what it really refers to is someone who has a problem with the way they regulate. It's a behavioral regulation, and I think it has to do with getting way absorbed into activated states. Okay, in other words, you typically see it with people who have anger management issues, people who get absorbed into their delusions and fantasy, and you really notice that it's kind of like it's clearly kind of on the level of mental illness. You know, perfect example would be the Lori Vallow. I mean, everybody in her family said she basically went crazy well in advance of having her husband Charles Vallow killed. Okay, so the family knew that she was mentally unstable for decades. And then the final straw was that as she got close to middle age, she really started falling into this Mormon kind of Mormon, apocalyptic Mormons and just preppers and stuff. And she really just kind of went off the deep end. The family sort of tolerated it because they just wanted her to be happy, but it was clearly in the neighborhood of mental illness. And anybody in the family wouldn't have used a buzzword like narcissism, but they would have said she was kind of going crazy. So basically, I think NPD is a kind of tendency towards craziness, but in the area of fantasy and in I would say just kind of dealing with getting activated, things that activate us. Like, you know the difference between someone who falls in love, who's healthy, they kind of get a little crazy falling in love, but it's sort of they still retain their humanity. But then, a person with a personality disorder, because when they fall in love, suddenly that person is the best thing in the world and they're changing all their habits and they're just kind of acting all giddy and stuff. Or they get a new job and suddenly they're just like, they're too into it. Like they get like overly absorbed into their enthusiasms and their shiny objects, and you can just kind of tell when it crosses the line and you're not dealing with a normal person. Okay, but as far as like narcissistic thought patterns and narcissistic manners of thinking, that's something that's all over humanity. That's something that's all over society, including how we impose our expectations for people who are going to get into maybe improving their personality. Okay. Because as soon as you come with an NPD diagnosis, you're not just dealing with your actual mental illness, because you do have a neurological problem. But on top of that, you have to fit into society's expectations, which themselves, I think, have narcissistic aspects. Okay. In other words, you have to suddenly bear yourself as a defective person against the idea that we as humanity are maybe something that is maybe too good to be true. You know what I mean? Maybe we're not, maybe nobody should, how would I say? Maybe it is just false. It is just dishonest. It's inauthentic to portray the basic average human being as maybe kinder, nobler, more empathetic than really the average person really is. Okay, and why do we want to pursue something that's inauthentic and tainted with a dishonesty of another narcissistic process, which is already in the culture? So there's a lot of questions that we have to ask ourselves as we get into, let's say, looking at recovery. What is an authentic recovery? Why would anybody want to start with an NPD diagnosis and then make it worse by getting into a narcissistic recovery? You're free to do that, but like we should ask that question. Like, is that really getting better? Is that really, even if you're maybe superficially getting better, is that really an authentic way to be? Um, so I do personally. I guess I have discomfort because I see the narcissism everywhere. We as a humanity are narcissistic. Okay, we don't know how good we are. We don't know how kind we are. In the United States, kindness is everywhere, but at the same time, we trash the environment. We trash the environment with chemicals. We treat if you were to measure the value, the goodness of a human being by how we treat amphibians and fish and reptiles. I grew up in South Carolina in the 1970s, and I remember, even then you could tell the reptiles, the salamanders, the frogs, the snakes and stuff. You could tell they were really kind of hard to find, and you could tell those are very delicate animals, very almost incompatible with too much human population. And I think as the decades have rolled on, I mean, it's been devastation for our amphibian, amphibian relatives, our reptilian relatives. We treat the environment like garbage, and all we talk about is how we need to have more population and stuff. So like I don't really. I think all the repeating and repeating of empathy and how kindness and compassion. This is just buzzwords that mean nothing. I mean, it's just like racking on a cymbal. Just rapping on a cymbal. It's just noise. I don't think human beings are really that great, nice, wonderful. We're okay. I mean, and we'll probably be more okay if we quit pretending to be better than what we really are. So I mean, the whole society could look into a narcissism. But then here's the question: like, if you're narcissistic, is is it is there something narcissistic about looking at yourself too much to get better? You know what I mean? So how do we deal with that? And I guess the best thing I can say is that I don't have an easy answer to that, but I think we should be aware of that paradox. Okay, that there is something very narcissistic about coming from a diagnosis of having, let's say, a cluster B problem or an addictions problem or anything, and then having to look at your own personality and focus on it to maybe become something that's not authentic. Even in the spirit of rehabilitation or the spirit of recovery. So how do I deal with that? Well, first of all, I don't pretend there's any magic solution. Maybe narcissism's everywhere, you know. But I think just being aware of that will give us a little sobriety. Okay. And then finally, the most important thing is I have decided philosophically that I will never focus on my personality characteristics. I'll never focus on them. What I will do is focus on my temperament. Okay. I know that I have issues with getting a little bit too absorbed into, let's say activated states and maybe kind of on the lines of anger management, but with all kinds of things like enthusiasms and all that. So I do look at my temperament, but I don't focus on my personality characteristics. I don't think that's healthy. At least for now. I may change my mind, but I just leave that. Thanks.